Good evening and welcome to Mesa College. My name is Alessandra Moctezuma and I'm the Gallery Director and Museum Studies Professor here at the college. We're very glad you could join us today. We are truly honored to have Richard Liu and James Luna here this evening to talk to us about their work. Hopefully you had a chance to see their exhibition. And actually I'm going to have Professor Robert Sanchez talk a little bit about them because he's a good friend and I thought it'd be nice if he would say a few words. I just wanted to thank our students in the Museum Studies program. We have the gallery as a laboratory and we feature emerging and established artists here in the gallery, and so the students have this great opportunity to work with the artists but I also want to give them a hand if they're here just because they worked really hard to get this show up. And I also wanted to thank my staff, which is small but does wonders, as Pat Vine, who's just walked in there, up there. Marisa Barua and Jacqueline Sarvis and Jenny Armour, because they worked really, really hard to make everything happen and make sure that everything is done. And so I am so glad to have Richard back here at Mesa showing his work. I have to tell you a story that actually Richard is the one that hired me back in 2001. And he and the group of people, but he was the chair of the department, and so when I arrived, he welcomed me. He took me on a tour of the college, and then he told me, "I leave you here, but I now off to Georgia." So I was sad because I was looking forward to working with him, but we've had seeing what he's been doing in Georgia and now in Tennessee has been wonderful, and to have him back here for this exhibit is really great. And I also have a small story about James. James, of course, we're honored to have him here. He's an internationally renowned artist and performer. When I was working at SPARC, the Social and Public Art Resource Center, back in 1992, he actually came and also performed there. So two of my the people that I looked up to, the artists that I looked up to are here today. So the program's going to go like this. Robert is going to introduce Richard and James, and then Richard is going to talk about his work. We'll have a Q&A, and then it's going to be James's presentation. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, welcome everybody. Alessandra asked me maybe about 15-20 minutes ago if I could do this introduction, and then gave me these pages of, well, you can look at the highlighted things. But I have known Richard and James for many years, since, probably around the mid-'80s, late '80s, when I first came in. Earlier than that. All right, see, that's what happens when you have to wing it. But in any case, she could have asked a number of individuals to introduce them, because Richard and James have been renowned artists from San Diego, but also part of the local art community, both Native American, Chicano art community here in San Diego, that have nurtured each other, worked together for many years, and there's others that, as I said, know them just as well. I didn't want to fail to acknowledge we have two exceptional artists from groups of individuals we've worked with before, David Avalos and Victor Ochoa, and if you guys could just raise your hand. I make that as part of the introduction because I think it's important to show the connections we all have had over the years. I'm not saying that it's been an easy relationship all the time when artists work together. There's always, poetic license and opinions and things. Yeah, nicely, gently put. So I'll start with Richard. Richard and I met at a time when we were both working out of the Centro Cultural de la Raza. David, Victor, Isaac Arnstein, many individuals who were there at the time. And both were involved in a group known as the Border Art Workshop, Taller de Arte Fronterizo. And we got to know each other really well after collaborating for quite a few years in the group. We began to collaborate as a duo. So we go back, as I said, quite a distance. Richard, again, Alessandra gave me all this information. It's way too, there's too much information there for me to even start with, and I'd rather you have the time to listen to their voices, because they're probably two of the more articulate speakers you'll ever come across, and also insightful in terms of being educators themselves, giving of themselves to talk to younger artists, to anyone really, about their work. Richard has had numerous awards and accolades, far too many to list here, but the whole notion of the pedigree and the sort of background of an artist is something that sometimes it feels like baggage for different artists who are as humble as these two to have bandied about by other individuals. But I will say they both have exhibited locally, nationally, and internationally, and continue to do so. And well, with this day and age of Googling, just Google their names and you'll come across reams of information, much more concisely stated than I could give right now. I do just want to say with Richard, not only an artist collaborator, but consider him as a brother, and to have him back here is a wonderful thing. James Luna, I've known as well for a long time. Some early shows at the Centro that David put together on an NEA grant, solo shows, was when I came across James, and we met because both of us did some solo shows back then. And over the years, I've been a huge fan of Luna and his work, and followed him avidly. My wife and I, Emiko, who's also a performance artist and collaborator, we both have spent many days and nights just talking about their work and looking at it and relaying it to our students as well, because we feel it's important. It's important for individuals to understand that you have, especially coming out of San Diego, in this region, two of the most, what I feel are seminal important artists working today. So without further introduction, other than I did want to mention that James did receive a Doctor of Humanities from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it says, please welcome Dr. Luna, but we're welcoming Richard Liu. Anyway, that's all I'll say.
I'm not sure what Robert said because I was worried about my pants falling down when I got up. Thank goodness that didn't happen. For those of you in the audience, of course. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, Alessandra, and my wonderful friend Pat Vine for bringing me here, and especially to show with the wonderful Mr. Luna, who's a good friend of mine and has been an inspiration to my work for a number of years. And but the thing is, I've been really kind of overwhelmed by seeing all these wonderful faces from high school, and my teacher, Pasha Turley, is here, and students of mine, and former artist collaborators, and etc. It's so wonderful. I don't think any of you can fully understand how formative you have been to my life, and I thank you. The work that I do is about you, and the work that I do is for you, and the work that I do is for my family. My family is also here, and they have been the content of my work since the inception of my artistic life. And also I wanted to make mention that Chicano Park Day is April 19th. Annie Ross is here somewhere. There she is. If you want more information, go over there. But I did want to mention the Centro, because the Centro was the point of origin, my point of nacimiento, my ideological nacimiento, where all those wonderful people that challenged me and challenged our community and the outside world in regards to affirming who we are as a Chicano people. And that was such an important time in my life. Something that all of my university training could not prepare me for participating at the Centro. A beautiful experience, and something that I carry forward with me, not just as an artist, but as a father, as a friend, as an arts administrator, because you don't grow up as a kid going, I want to be department chair. You know, that would be a very warped childhood. But my training at the Centro and with the Border Art Workshop said to me that those are important things to do, is to work in administration and hopefully make changes there. So I'm going to start. I'm not going to show you all my work because that would be like really too boring and too long. I'm just going to talk about the more sort of interventionist pieces, not the pieces that I've done in galleries, but they end up in galleries somehow. But the pieces that I've done that were out in the public sphere, because in actuality I've always had that sort of interest, and in my work with the people at the Centro and the Border Art Workshop, that interest was solidified and girded by the theoretical understanding of the sort of things that we needed to do in regards to critiquing the institution. So I'll start there and finish there. Some of you know this piece, some of you may not. I'm going to be presumptuous by saying some of you know this piece. Jim Elliott, who's in the audience, did the photography for this piece. This is called The Border Door. And this is a site-specific installation piece that was placed on the U.S.-Mexican border in 1988. And I was interested in how we can create objects that somehow starts to communicate with the site. So the site was very important, obviously. And I grew up in both in Tijuana and in San Diego. And my sister over here, Linda, I don't know where you are. There you are. You know, we both lived in La Colonia Roma. And in actuality, that piece came from us crossing the border every day to go to school. Our father was a butcher at Mayfair Market at that time, and he would drop us off at Harborside Elementary School, and he'd go off to work. But that idea of being constantly questioned, our identity, our legitimacy, really was the basis for this work. And also how my grandmother coming over and staying with us, all of those sorts of things, and how problematic it became for these 80-year-old people, my grandparents, just trying to come and stay with us in the United States to go see Disneyland, but that somehow became a threat to the United States. But anyways, this piece was an in situ piece, and it lasted about 2 days. It was destroyed, but that's okay. That's you know, when you do public pieces, something like that's going to happen, as David Avalos so well knows as well. From that point, I went to the neighborhood where I grew up, La Colonia Roma, and I handed out over 250 keys inviting people to use my border door. So here are images all shot by Jim Elliott over there, and he just sort of followed me around taking pictures of me. And it was really a wonderful, I mean, the only person that actually saw the entire piece was Jim Elliott. You know? Because it wasn't a piece that I didn't send out invitations or anything, because that wasn't really appropriate. You know, this was like a sort of a very personal piece that became very public at the same time. And so and I ended up starting at La Colonia Roma, and I walked over to La Colonia Altamira, and I ended in the La Casa de los Pobres in La Colonia Altamira. And so, as I said, I was very interested in how this door would exist in this space, this highly contested space, this historically contested space, the U.S.-Mexican border, and how that space would create this sort of dialogue between the object and the site, and how the object would make us think, hopefully would create different ways of looking at the site, and how the site would hopefully make us think about a different way of looking at this object. And so there was a sort of dialogue that I was hoping that would occur, that these two objects that came together would sort of solicit a different way of thinking about that space and that object. I was part of this group as the Border Art Workshop, and there's Victor's name in there as well, and Patricio just walked in a little while ago, and Robert Sanchez and Michael Storer, who passed away not too long ago. And so we did this piece that traversed the entire length of the border. And that was a really crazy time. It was in July 1990, if I remember correctly. And it was one of the hottest Julys on record during that time. And there were like 8 or 9 artists in this motorhome. And it was no bloodletting, but very near. There was a lot of near calls. But here we are. That's right. We don't have pictures of that. These are all photographs by Patricio Chavez. And so one of the things that we were doing what's called border sutures, where we created all of these staples, these steel staples. And then at each point, each town along the border, we would all take turns, and sometimes we would just do it ourselves, and sometimes we would call out the community, and then we would all take turns using a sledgehammer to, as Guillermo Gomez Peña would say, would heal the wound, metaphorically heal the wound that exists between the United States. Or that was our attempt. And so we would staple our countries back together again. And there's Carmela Castrejon, Berta Jotar, Robert Sanchez, and myself. A lot thinner, not Robert. Robert's always been thin. But with hair, both of us with hair, not Robert. And so we're again doing another border sutures, a suturing, a stapling, but here we're transplanting plants as well. And our good friend Marco Anguiano, one of the other things that we would do is we would stamp the letters of the names of the people that were there onto the staple. So there would be the sort of collective act of healing that would occur with these staples. And there were all sorts of ancillary performance pieces as well that would go along with this larger performance. And then we always included our children. There's Robert's and my children there. I mean, we didn't have them together, we had them separate. And this is actually one of my favorite photographs that Patricio took of this particular project. And so you can see how large these staples were. Oops. You can see how large these staples were. They were, anywhere from 6 feet to 2.5 feet. And as I said, because we zigzagged back and forth along the border, and then at every town we would staple that border packed together again. Another piece that I did that was worked in the public sphere was the headlines piece, where I invited artists of color to come up with the text and or graphics that articulated the issues of the conquest. And so these pieces would last. Well, this one didn't last because we used Maybelline eyeliner. This lasted one day. It rained. I mean, the one day it rains in California, and then Pass. I mean, good thing Robert took pictures of it because it was gone. But then, so after that technical faux pas, we figured out that Crayola markers works best, and so far they're non-toxic, but so far, I mean, I'm not drooling, so I guess I'm a testament to the non-toxicity of that product. But so these things would last anywhere from 7 to 10 days on my head, and so I had to like kind of live my life in a different sort of way, as you can imagine. But here this is the crazy part, because here I was thinking, oh, this would be really great to create these sort of dialogues with the public, because I wanted to create a piece that was outside of, as David would say, outside of the museum ghetto. So outside of that context, right? I wanted to make work that I would be walking around in public, and I would encounter the public, and hopefully have conversations about this content. And so I wanted to be able not to divorce myself from the work, because as artists or writers, filmmakers, etc., we can like set aside our work and then participate in other roles of our lives as lovers and husbands and wives and girlfriends, boyfriends, students, etc. But here I couldn't separate myself from the work, and so here I thought I'd be able to like engage the public in conversation. But actually, what happened was I just heightened the threat, because here I'm this big brown guy. Now most of you know me, like I'm really kind of nice and, as James says, easygoing Richard. And but people that don't know me, they're like, holy shit, here's this big brown guy, and he's got crazy shit on his head. And so when I would go shopping, I would push the shopping cart along in the aisle, and people would just exit. And so by design, it was a failure. But what happened though that was really wonderful is that is all the places that I would go to, that I would frequent, the grocery store and the video store. Remember the video store? And here at Mesa College, those places became my galleries. Those places became my museums, and the people that worked there became my docents. And so the baggers and the checkers at the Vaughn's grocery store, for example, in El Cajon, where I would frequent, because remember I have 4 children, you go to the grocery store a lot. And they, after a while, since I didn't stick them up, they knew that I was like a safe person, and they would ask me like, hey, what's your deal? What are you doing? And so then I would tell them. And then they would tell their customers. So I would be checking out the grocery line and by myself, and there'd be like 10 people over there, and I would hear the checker would say, that's Richard Liu. He's doing this piece on the 500th anniversary. And he's an artist. And so they became the people that would disseminate all this information. And that was not by design. That was that's by just human design, but not by mine. And that was like a really wonderful thing that occurred from that project. This is Victor Ochoa's piece, and this was a really interesting piece as well, because, as I said, I was really heightening the fear of my brown body. And I remember my wife and I, we were looking at this sofa at this auction, and this man comes up to me, and we were looking at this sofa. It's like this beautiful off-white sofa. It was scalloped, and it was a little beautiful love seat, and we were like right about to bid on it, and this guy taps my shoulder and he goes, "You must have been the baddest motherfucker in prison." And I'm like, and I had forgotten I had this piece on my head, because I was focusing on the love seat, right, and how beautiful it would look in our picture window in El Cajon. And so, and he was like one of the few people that actually would approach me in this project. And so I turned around and I said, "Wait," and of course he waited, because for him I was the baddest motherfucker. And so, but then after that we had like this really wonderful conversation. Now, I'm not going to talk about Los Antropoglocos piece, although my wonderful friend Robert Sanchez, and because that would like take up too much time. But I will tell you this: that was for me one of the most fun, most engaging, most dynamic work that I've ever done with someone else that didn't require lubrication. So, but that was like some of my happiest time making artwork was with Robert Sanchez, and thank you, Robert, for the both of us doing this wonderful work. But I did want to include that and just mention that. This is a piece that Bill Fisher and I did. I don't know if you guys remember with the missing bride, and she talked, Jennifer Wilbanks. And so what Bill Fisher and I did, we did a whole bunch of posters, and we posted them around her hometown, because she talked about how a Latino man with bad teeth and this overweight white woman kidnapped her and sexually abducted her. And those sorts of tropes of the fear of hypersexualized brown men and black men was the trope that she used to sort of remove herself from the guilt. But what she did was potentially put other people in harm's way, and rather than owning up to not wanting to get married. So we said, well, what about this missing stereotype? And so we were using that play on word. And Bill Fisher and I thought, well, who else? What other Latino man and white woman do we know of? It's like, well, Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. So we did these series of posters, as I mentioned before, and they also were T-shirts. And we sent the T-shirts to her fiance, the district attorney, etc., etc. We never heard from any of them except the district attorney, Danny Porter, the Gwinnett County district attorney. He returned the shirt saying he could not accept the gift. And so we also made her into tortillas as well. And then the show that I was showing her in, this piece I was censored, and so there I am with my Centro and Bautov training, doing a protest at the reception, handing out tortillas with her name. Okay, this is a piece I did at Memphis. This is at Nathan Bedford Forrest Park. And Nathan Bedford Forrest, for those of you that don't know, he's a Confederate general. Started the Klan in Tennessee, was the Grand Wizard, and was also responsible for the Fort Pillow Massacre, where over 200 Union soldiers were, 200 unarmed Union soldiers were killed. And so, what do you do in the South is you actually put a statue and you put a park together. And so we have this public park. Now they changed the name to Health Science Park. But, what is it? You can't make this stuff up, right? And so, what I did was I created a series of boxes and created this performance piece. And actually, it's the first performance piece that I was not in. And so my daughter and her friend John sang. They sang Negro spirituals in front of this statue, and you'll see them right here. Oops, the next slide. There they are. And then I had a group of people, because I had created these boxes, and on these boxes were painted 5 images, and there was 1 photograph. And so while Gloria and John are singing these spirituals, like Wade in the Water, these people would stack these boxes. And they would create this counter image. So if you were sitting in front of the statue, this would happen. And then I invited 6 people from Memphis to come and tell their stories. And so there were counter stories or counter narratives and counter images to this statue of this equestrian statue of General Forrest. And the way I was thinking about it is that here we are, because it's a public park that the public pays for the transmission of this ideology 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, non-stop, uncontested ideology. And so in my little humble sort of way, for 1 hour, I went in there and complicated the space by adding more stories, more narratives, counter-narratives, and counter-images. And so you just imagine that two people singing, right, these spirituals, and people building these images up until they create this pyramid that blocked it all out. And then someone comes up, the singing stops, and then they tell their story, right? And they leave in silence, and then the boxes are torn down in silence, and then another image starts to be built up, and the singing begins again. And so this image is the image of the Mississippi River that you see here. You know how the Mississippi, or any river, kind of jumps its course, etc. And then another person, Elaine Blanchard, comes and tells her story. Oops. Another image. So every time you turn the block, there would be a new image. That's my son Ming, and he told the story and then played the trumpet. Another image. Another storyteller, Francisco Flores. Another image. This is Fort Pickering, which was a Union encampment in Memphis. Memphis actually fell to the Union forces in '62 and was a Union city. But all of that is obliterated. That history is obliterated. The Confederate narrative is very strong in the South, regardless of the history. And then Dr. Jenkins came and told her story. And then what would the park look like without the statue? And then Agustin Diaz. We have Aztec dancers in Memphis. So Agustin Diaz came and told his story. He was the last to tell his story. And then he danced around the statue, warrior to warrior. And I've also restarted again this headlines piece, but I stopped. My mom died about 2 years ago, April 9th, so I stopped. And at some point I want to continue this piece. But I'm doing the headlines piece again because it's the 20th anniversary, the 22nd anniversary or so. And here's another shot. And I think, yeah, okay, and that is all. Thank you so much. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Did you get the love seat?
Yes, we got the love, $20. $20. It was great. It was a great love seat. Yes.
You mentioned at the beginning wanting to interact with the public when you do pieces, and I wanted to find out your opinion on one of the pieces that I think you did. Los Antropologos had a show at MOBA, and there was a talk, and I think you were the person giving the talk. I was in the audience. There was another guy in the audience, and he had a red baseball cap. It was basically the guy in the audience was so pissed at your talk.
No, we're not that smart.
Throwing his hat up at you or Lou was talking at the pedestal, and there was an interchange, and I was just going, this is uncomfortable.
I don't, Robert and I, and myself, and a great number of artists in this audience have been been doing that kind of work for a long time. And I look at it this way, and I remember actually Sean Murphy's father's like, "Why are you looking for trouble?" And I don't look for trouble. What I'm doing is I'm asserting my reality. And if I don't assert my reality, how I view the world, then that's a negation of my reality, and that's like a form of death. And so when we live in this sort of occupied spaces, within these sort of systems of oppression, if we can't move and shift and make space for ourselves in order for us to say, this is how we view the world, it's suffocating. And so when people react in that sort of way, I understand that, because we're creating this sort of dissonance that they don't understand. But dissonance, as we know, is what education is all about. That's how we grow, when we're challenged, right? And so I've been called a racist, a reverse racist. You can't imagine how many times. At the last piece that I did, a white separatist online journal wrote about me, which was just last year. And then people wrote to the university president telling her I should be fired. This was just last year. But I have to do, I'm not looking for trouble. I just feel I'm compelled to state who I am. And if we can't do that here, right?
Yeah, I thought it was one of the most funniest
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it at my expense. Any last questions? Yes, Debbie. And Debbie and I had collaborated on a wonderful piece as well, my niece Debbie.
So when you had the images on your head and you were saying that your intent was to engage the public and have people ask questions, but you were kind of surprised that it would actually alienate people.
Right.
So I kind of find that a little disingenuous, because you're very aware of how brown and people of color are perceived in the public, and especially when you have what does look like these tattoos, really big.
Yeah.
So just can you comment on that? That you probably did kind of anticipate people reacting to you in a fierce way.
My niece is calling me out. I wish I was that smart, Debbie. I really thought this was going to work. I remember asking, I was like, James, what are you going to do? And James said, he said something to me that was so brilliant, but I still carried forward. He says, I don't care what happens in 1992, I care what happens in 1993. That's what he said to me. And that was such a powerful thing. He's like, what happens when we're not the flavor of the year? That's what he was saying to me. How are we going to carry forward when we're not the flavor of the year? And but I really thought it was going to work. But it did work. I think there were some beautiful images, and I learned a lot from that piece. And I really thought people would come and talk. But I think a lot of it has to do with my personality. I'm thinking, I know I'm a nice person, so of course people are going to come up and talk to me. But that just wasn't so. A few people did. The people that thought I was an ex-con. Yes.
As you revisited this piece 20-something years later, do you find that people's reactions are different?
Very different. Very different. And I think a lot of it has to do with the Oakland Raiders and their fans. They're so used to that. Actually, no, a lot of it has to do because of body art and how it's been accepted now. And so I don't get the same sort of reaction, which is fine with me. So people are coming, when I was doing those, people were coming up to me and talking. And so that was nice. Yes. One last question, because we got to go to James.
When you were doing the box series in the park, did you get any notable responses from people that weren't telling their stories?
No, that piece was really wonderful. I did it 2 times. The first time I did it was, I did it under the rules of the park. The second time I did it, I didn't follow the rules of the park, and I expected the police to come, and they did come. And then when I saw them, they were taking pictures of themselves with the Aztec dancers. And so I knew it was going to go well, and that was it. And I do want to, thank you so much, but I do want to respect James. Thank you.